You think yourself victorious, Cronus. Uranus's voice boomed down from the wounded sky. Weak now, but still terrible to hear. You have overthrown your father and taken his throne. But mark my words, youngest of the Titans. As you have done to me, so shall it be done to you. Your own children shall rise against you. One of your sons will cast you down just as you have cast me down. You will know the same betrayal, the same agony, the same loss. This I promise you, Cronus. This is my curse upon you. No matter what you do, no matter how you try to prevent it, destiny will find you. The words echoed across the cosmos, a prophecy that would haunt Cronus for the rest of his reign. But in that moment, flushed with victory, standing over his defeated father with the bloody sickle in his hands, Cronus laughed. He had won. He was king now. The curse meant nothing to him, or so he told himself. He would be cleverer than his father. He would find a way to escape destiny. From Uranus's blood falling upon Gaia, new beings were born. Where the droplets struck the earth, the Erinyes sprang forth, the Furies, terrible goddesses of vengeance, who would hunt down those who committed crimes against family. The Meliae, the ash tree nymphs, also emerged, beautiful but dangerous. And from the sea foam that formed around Uranus's severed parts, as they drifted through the waves, there arose a figure of transcendent beauty, Aphrodite, goddess of love and desire, born from violence but destined to become the embodiment of passion and beauty. With Uranus overthrown and banished to the distant reaches of the sky, Cronus claimed dominion over the cosmos. He took his sister Rhea as his queen, and together they presided over what came to be known as the Golden Age, a time of peace and plenty. Under Cronus's rule, the world flourished. The harvests were always bountiful. The seasons turned in perfect harmony. Humanity, when it eventually came to exist, would remember this era as a paradise, a time when people lived in contentment, free from war and hardship, aging slowly, if at all. But beneath this golden surface, darkness grew. Cronus could not forget his father's curse. Every night, as he sat upon his throne, he heard Uranus's words echoing in his mind. Your own children shall rise against you. The prophecy gnawed at him like a canker, filling him with paranoia and dread. He looked at his wife Rhea with growing suspicion. He gazed up at the stars and saw not beauty, but threats. He felt the weight of destiny pressing down upon him, and he became obsessed with finding a way to cheat fate. When Rhea became pregnant with their first child, Cronus made a decision that would define his reign and set in motion the events leading to his own downfall. If his children could not exist, they could not overthrow him. It was simple, brutal logic. And so, when Rhea gave birth to their first daughter, the beautiful Hestia, goddess of the hearth and home, Cronus did the unthinkable. Before Rhea could even hold her newborn child, before Hestia could draw more than a few breaths of free air, Cronus snatched the infant from her mother's arms and swallowed her whole. Rhea's screams of horror and grief filled the palace. She begged, she pleaded, she raged at her husband, but Cronus was unmoved. This was necessary, he told her. This was how they would escape the curse. The child was not dead, for gods cannot truly die, but she was imprisoned in the absolute darkness of Cronus's stomach, as secure and as isolated as the Cyclopes and Hecatoncheires in Tartarus. Rhea wept bitter tears, but there was nothing she could do. Cronus was king, and his word was law. And so it went, again and again, a cycle of horror repeated 5 times. When Rhea bore Demeter, goddess of the harvest, Cronus swallowed her. When Hera, future queen of the gods, was born, she too disappeared down her father's throat. Hades, the future lord of the underworld, suffered the same fate. Poseidon, who would one day rule the seas, joined his siblings in the darkness of their father's belly. Each time, Rhea's grief grew deeper, her rage more intense, her desperation more profound. By the time Rhea became pregnant with her 6th child, she had reached her breaking point. She could not bear to lose another child to Cronus's paranoid hunger. This time, things would be different. This time, she would need help, and she knew exactly where to turn. She went to her mother Gaia, the earth herself, and together with her father Uranus, still suffering from his ancient wound but willing to aid his daughter against his hated son, they devised a plan. When Rhea's time came, when the pains of labor began to grip her, she did not remain in the palace under Cronus's watchful eye. Instead, under cover of darkness, she fled. Guided by Gaia, she traveled far from the Titan's stronghold, far from Mount Othrys where Cronus held court. She journeyed to the island of Crete, to a place of wild beauty and ancient power, where the mountains rose steep and forbidding toward the sky. There on the slopes of Mount Ida, beneath the shelter of ancient trees and jutting cliffs, was a cave. This was no ordinary cavern. It was a place of deep magic, a sanctified space where the boundaries between mortal and divine, between earth and sky, grew thin. Some traditions hold that it was called the Dictaean Cave. Others say it was the Idaean Cave. But all agree that it was here, in this hidden place, that Rhea would give birth to the child who would change everything. The night was filled with Rhea's cries, but they were muffled by the thick stone walls of the cave. Gaia herself attended the birth, her hands gentle despite their power, guiding the child into the world. And when the infant finally emerged, wailing lustily, his tiny fists clenched and his eyes bright with an inner fire that spoke of future glory, both goddesses felt a surge of hope. This child was different. This child was special. This was Zeus, and even as a newborn, there was something about him that suggested greatness, a presence that filled the cave with crackling energy. But there was no time to celebrate. Cronus would soon notice Rhea's absence. He would demand to see the child. The deception had to be perfect. While Gaia took the infant Zeus deeper into the cave, to a place where he would be safe and hidden, Rhea searched the mountainside until she found what she needed, a stone, roughly the same size and weight as a newborn god. She wrapped this stone in swaddling clothes, tight and secure, so that it felt like a squirming infant in her arms. Rhea returned to the palace, exhausted from her journey and her labor, and presented the bundle to Cronus. Some versions of the tales say that Cronus, in a moment of uncharacteristic sentiment, asked to nurse the child one last time before consuming it. In this version, Rhea pressed her breast against the stone, and the milk that sprayed forth shot across the heavens, creating the Milky Way, that great river of stars. But sentiment did not stay Cronus's hand. He took the bundle, and without even unwrapping it to look at his supposed child, he opened his mouth wide and swallowed it whole. The stone tumbled down into the darkness of Cronus's belly, coming to rest beside the 5 imprisoned children already there. But Cronus noticed nothing amiss. He sat back on his throne, satisfied that once again he had thwarted destiny. Meanwhile, far away on Crete, the infant Zeus lay in his hidden cave, and his real life was only just beginning. The cave where Zeus was hidden became his nursery and his fortress. Gaia appointed guardians to watch over him, beings who would protect him with their lives and ensure that no word of his existence reached Cronus's ears. The Curetes, also called the Corybantes, were warrior spirits or perhaps young gods, devoted to Rhea and fierce in their loyalty. They danced around the cave day and night, clashing their spears against their bronze shields in a wild, rhythmic dance that filled the air with noise. This constant clamor served a vital purpose. Zeus, like any infant, cried. He wailed when he was hungry, fussed when he was uncomfortable, and shrieked when he wanted attention. The sound of a crying baby might seem insignificant, but Zeus was no mortal child. His voice carried power even in infancy, and his cries could potentially be heard even as far away as Mount Othrys. The Curetes' shield clashing and war cries drowned out these sounds, ensuring that Cronus would never hear his hidden son. Zeus needed nourishment, and here too the gods provided. A magical goat named Amalthea became the infant's wet nurse. She was no ordinary animal, but a creature of divine nature, her milk sweet and nourishing beyond measure. Some traditions say that Amalthea was actually a nymph who owned the goat, while others claim the goat herself was divine. Regardless, Zeus suckled at her teats, growing strong on her milk. In some versions, when Amalthea died or shed her skin, Zeus fashioned her hide into the Aegis, the impenetrable shield that would become one of his most famous attributes. A nymph named Melissa also cared for Zeus, feeding him honey so pure and sweet that it seemed to contain the very essence of life itself. The bees of Crete were sacred, and their honey was no ordinary fare. It was ambrosial, filled with vitality, causing Zeus to grow at an accelerated rate. Within months, the infant had become a child. Within years, the child had grown into a powerful young god, strong and intelligent, his eyes bright with determination and his bearing already regal. Hidden in his cave, watched over by loyal guardians, Zeus learned and trained. The Curetes taught him the arts of war, how to wield a spear and shield, how to command and strategize. Gaia visited often, telling him stories of his imprisoned siblings, of the Cyclopes and Hecatoncheires still suffering in Tartarus, of his father's tyranny and the curse that doomed Cronus to overthrow. She told him that he was destined for greatness, that he would be king of gods and men, that he would bring about a new age. And Zeus listened, and he grew, and he waited for the day when he would be strong enough to fulfill that destiny. The years passed, and Zeus matured from boy to young man, from young man to god in the full flower of his power. He stood tall and mighty, his presence commanding, his eyes flashing with the same lightning that would one day become his signature weapon. The time for hiding was over. The time for action had come. Zeus emerged from his cave, descended from Mount Ida, and set forth to claim his birthright. His first objective was clear: rescue his siblings. They had been imprisoned in Cronus's stomach for decades now, trapped in darkness, neither dead nor truly alive. Zeus consulted with Gaia and with Metis, an Oceanid of profound wisdom who would later become his first wife. Together, they concocted a plan. Zeus would need to make Cronus vomit up the children he had swallowed, but the Titan king would not do so willingly. Trickery would be required. Metis prepared a special concoction, a potion that was part poison, part emetic, designed specifically to affect even the immortal constitution of a Titan. Zeus approached his father not as an enemy, but as a stranger, disguised so thoroughly that Cronus did not recognize his own son. He offered Cronus a cup of wine, or in some versions, a drink of meat and mustard, speaking of it as a gift, a tribute to the great king. Cronus, never suspecting treachery from this apparent stranger, accepted the cup and drank deep. The effect was immediate and violent. Cronus's stomach churned and roiled. He doubled over, clutching his belly, and then he began to vomit. First came the stone, the one that Rhea had wrapped and given him in place of Zeus. It shot from his mouth and landed with a heavy thud, and Zeus quickly claimed it, knowing it would later be placed at Delphi as a symbol of his victory. But Cronus's purging was far from over. One by one, Zeus's siblings emerged from their father's throat. Poseidon came first, god of the seas and earthquakes, his hair the color of ocean waves, his eyes reflecting the depths of the abyss. He stood dripping with stomach acid and immediately understood what had happened. His gaze locked on Zeus, and in that moment, a bond of brotherhood was forged that would last through the ages. Then came Hades, grim and serious, even in this moment of liberation, his eyes shadowed and dark, his bearing suggesting the underworld that he would one day rule. He nodded to Zeus, a gesture of respect and understanding. Hera emerged next, imperious and beautiful, her dignity intact despite her circumstances. She would one day become Zeus's queen, but already there was a tension between them, an attraction mixed with mutual wariness. Then Demeter, goddess of the harvest, life and fertility incarnate, her relief at freedom palpable. And finally Hestia, the firstborn, the one who had spent the longest time in captivity, gentle and kind, the goddess of hearth and home, whose presence brought a sense of warmth and safety. The 6 young gods stood together for the first time, facing their father, who was still weak and disoriented from his violent purging. Zeus did not hesitate. He laid out his plan, speaking with a passion and eloquence that would become legendary. Cronus was a tyrant. His reign had been built on fear and cruelty. He had imprisoned his children, both them and others, out of paranoid dread. It was time for change. It was time for a new order, one based not on fear but on justice, not on tyranny but on fair governance. Who was with him? The answer was unanimous. All 5 of his siblings pledged themselves to Zeus's cause. They would overthrow Cronus. They would claim their rightful place as rulers of the cosmos. But they all knew that this would not be easy. Cronus was not alone. He had the other Titans at his command, powerful beings who had ruled for ages. The young gods would need allies, and those allies would have to be powerful indeed. Zeus knew exactly where to find such allies. Deep beneath the earth, in the darkest pits of Tartarus, the Cyclopes and Hecatoncheires still languished, imprisoned since before the reign of Cronus began. If Zeus could free them, if he could earn their loyalty, they would provide the power needed to tip the scales. And so, leaving his siblings to gather their strength and prepare, Zeus descended into the underworld. The journey into Tartarus was not for the faint of heart. Zeus passed through layers of earth and stone, through caverns that echoed with the groans of the damned, through places where light had never shone and hope had never existed. The deeper he went, the darker and more oppressive the atmosphere became, until even his divine senses were overwhelmed by the sheer wrongness of the place. But Zeus pressed on, driven by purpose. At the gates of the deepest prison, Zeus encountered Campe, a monstrous female creature appointed by Cronus to guard the prisoners. She was hideous beyond description, a chimeric horror with the upper body of a woman, but the lower body of a serpent, with additional animal heads growing from various parts of her torso, each one snapping and snarling. Campe was ancient and powerful, a creature of pure malice, and she would not step aside for anyone. The battle between Zeus and Campe shook the foundations of Tartarus. Zeus, though young, fought with the fury of the righteous, his fists striking like sledgehammers, his rage giving him strength. Campe lashed out with fangs and claws, poison and fire, her many mouths screaming curses. They grappled in the darkness, two titanic forces colliding, until finally Zeus managed to get his hands around her throat. He squeezed, pouring all his strength into his grip, and Campe's struggles weakened, then ceased. The guardian of Tartarus was dead. Zeus strode past her corpse and found the cells where the Cyclopes and Hecatoncheires were held. They were skeletal thin from long captivity, their divine essence dimmed but not extinguished. When Zeus broke their chains, when the prison doors fell away, the six giants looked up at their liberator with eyes that held both hope and suspicion. Zeus did not mince words. He told them who he was, why he had come, and what he asked of them. He was going to war with Cronus. He needed their help. In return, he offered them freedom and honored positions in the new order he would create. The Cyclopes conferred among themselves briefly, then Brontes stepped forward as their spokesman. They would aid Zeus, he declared, and more than that, they would craft for him weapons such as the world had never seen. The Hecatoncheires, speaking through Cronus, also pledged their loyalty. They had been imprisoned by Uranus, then kept captive by Cronus. The prospect of vengeance burned bright in their hearts. Zeus fed them nectar and ambrosia, the food of the gods, and their strength began to return. Then the Cyclopes set to work at their forge, their single eyes glowing with intense focus. Fire roared, hammers rang against anvils, magic and craftsmanship merged. And from their labors came three weapons that would become legendary. For Zeus, they forged the master bolt, a thunderbolt of such power that it could shatter mountains and split the heavens. It was more than a weapon. It was the embodiment of the storm itself, crackling with barely contained energy. When Zeus gripped it for the first time, lightning danced around his fingers, and thunder rolled through Tartarus. For Poseidon, they created the trident, a three-pronged spear that commanded the seas and shook the earth. With this weapon, Poseidon could summon earthquakes, call forth tsunamis, and speak to every creature that dwelt in the ocean. And for Hades, they fashioned the helm of darkness, a helmet that granted its wearer complete invisibility. More than that, it inspired terror in those who sensed its presence, making Hades a wraith-like figure of dread, even when unseen. Armed with these weapons, accompanied by the Cyclopes and Hecatoncheires, Zeus ascended from Tartarus. The pieces were in place, the allies were gathered, the weapons were forged. Now it was time for war. The cosmos held its breath as the conflict that would define an age drew near. Zeus led his siblings to the tallest mountain in Greece, a peak that thrust up toward the sky as if trying to pierce the heavens themselves. This was Mount Olympus, and it would become the stronghold of the young gods. From its heights, they could see for leagues in every direction. The mountain slopes were steep and defensible, its peaks shrouded in eternal clouds that would conceal their movements. It was a fortress and a symbol, a place where the new order would make its stand. Zeus called all who would stand with him to gather at Olympus. His siblings came, of course, Poseidon with his trident, Hades with his dark helm, Hera regal and fierce, Demeter nurturing yet determined, Hestia calm but resolute. The Cyclopes and Hecatoncheires took up positions around the mountain, their mere presence a deterrent to any who might think to attack. But Zeus wanted more allies. He wanted to show that his cause was just, that he offered something better than Cronus's rule. The first to respond to his call was Styx, the great river goddess and daughter of Oceanus. She was one of the most powerful of the Oceanids, and her decision carried weight. Styx had heard Zeus's declaration, his promise that any who sided with him would be honored, that those who had no honors under the old order would receive them under his rule. She believed him. More than that, she brought her 4 children with her: Nike, goddess of victory; Zealous, god of zeal and rivalry; Kratos, god of strength; and Bia, goddess of force. These 4 would become Zeus's constant companions, embodiments of the qualities he valued most. In recognition of Styx's early support, Zeus decreed that all oaths sworn by the gods would be sworn upon her name, making her the guarantor of divine contracts for all eternity. Others came as well. Prometheus, the titan of forethought, whose mind could see futures yet unborn, looked at Cronus and saw only doom. He looked at Zeus and saw possibility, potential, a future worth fighting for. He brought his brother Epimetheus with him, though Epimetheus was less certain of the choice. Themis, the titaness of divine law and order, also joined Zeus's cause. She had always been troubled by Cronus's paranoid cruelty, by the way he had twisted justice to serve his own fears. Zeus's vision of a cosmos governed by proper order appealed to her sense of rightness. But these defectors were the exception. Most of the Titans remained loyal to Cronus, whether out of genuine belief in his rule, fear of his power, or simply because he was family and family stood together. Oceanus, the eldest Titan, though he did not actively fight, tacitly supported Cronus by not interfering. Hyperion, brilliant as the light he commanded, gathered his own children to fight for the old order. Iapetus, father of Prometheus but opposed to his son's choice, took up arms alongside Cronus. Crius and Coeus, the pillars of the cosmos, stood firm with their brother. And then there was Atlas. Among all the Titans who fought for Cronus, none was more formidable than Atlas. He was the general of the Titan armies, the warrior who led them into battle, the strategist who planned their campaigns. Atlas was immensely strong, perhaps the strongest of all the Titans, save for Cronus himself. He towered over even his fellow Titans, his shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of the world, his endurance seemingly limitless. When Atlas spoke, other Titans listened. When he commanded, they obeyed. He was utterly loyal to Cronus, seeing the young Olympians as usurpers and rebels who threatened the natural order. The battle lines were drawn. On Mount Olympus stood Zeus and his Olympians, the term by which they would come to be known, along with their allies among the Cyclopes, Hecatoncheires, and those few deities who had chosen their side. On Mount Othrys, ancient seat of Titan power, Cronus gathered his forces. The mountain had been the center of the universe for as long as anyone could remember, and from its heights, Cronus had ruled the Golden Age. Now it would become a fortress, a bastion from which the Titans would fight to preserve their supremacy. Between these two mountains lay all of Thessaly, the plains and valleys that would become the battlefield of gods. The very geography seemed to understand what was coming. The air grew heavy with anticipation. Animals fled the region in droves, sensing the approaching catastrophe. The sky darkened with clouds that had nothing to do with weather and everything to do with divine power gathering like a storm about to break. Zeus stood atop Olympus, his siblings arrayed around him, and looked across the distance to where Othrys rose against the horizon. He could feel Cronus there, could sense his father's presence like a dark weight pressing down on the world. The time for words had passed. The time for negotiation had never existed. This would be settled through combat, through a trial of strength and will that would determine not just who ruled, but what kind of universe this would be. Cronus, from his throne on Othrys, gazed back at Olympus. He could feel Zeus there, could sense the son he had thought safely imprisoned in his own stomach. The prophecy had come to pass. The curse had found its mark. Despite everything he had done, despite all his precautions, destiny had caught up with him. But Cronus was not ready to surrender. He was a Titan, ruler of the Golden Age, defeater of Uranus. If fate wanted to overthrow him, it would have to earn that victory through blood and suffering. Both sides made their final preparations. Weapons were sharpened, armor was donned, strategies were debated and refined. The Olympians, younger and less experienced, relied on their new weapons and the raw power of the Cyclopes and Hecatoncheires. The Titans, seasoned and wise, drew upon centuries of power and knowledge, their mastery of the fundamental forces of nature. Each side had to believe, that victory was possible. And then, on a morning when the sun rose blood-red over Thessaly, the first armies marched. The Titanomachy had begun. The ground trembled as the armies advanced. From Olympus descended the Olympians and their forces, a tide of divine power flowing down the mountainside. Zeus led the charge, his master bolt crackling in his hand, his very presence causing the air to ionize with barely contained electricity. Poseidon strode beside him, the trident gleaming, each step causing minor tremors as his power over earth and sea manifested. Hades moved like a shadow, sometimes visible, sometimes not, the helm of darkness making him an unpredictable and terrifying opponent. From Othrys came the Titans, and they were a sight to inspire both awe and terror. Atlas led them, his armor forged from the metals of fallen stars, his spear as tall as an oak tree. Behind him came the other Titans, each a force of nature made flesh. Hyperion blazed with solar radiance, light streaming from his armor and weapons. Iapetus moved with the weight of ages, every step measured and powerful. Cronus and Crete flanked the army, their presence like pillars holding up the very concept of order and structure. The two forces met in the valleys of Thessaly with a crash that could be heard from one end of the earth to the other. God struck Titan, divine force met ancient power, and the world reeled from the impact. Lightning bolts from Zeus seared through the air, striking Titan armor and leaving molten metal in their wake. Poseidon drove his trident into the ground, and earthquakes rippled out, throwing friend and foe alike from their feet. Hades appeared and disappeared, his sword finding gaps in Titan defenses, then vanishing before retaliation could come. But the Titans were not helpless before this onslaught. They had ruled for eons, and they knew how to wield power. Hyperion called upon the fury of the sun, and beams of concentrated solar energy lanced down from the sky, burning through Olympian defenses. Iapetus's spear, thrown with impossible strength, could punch through mountainsides. When it struck Olympian shields, they cracked and shattered. Cronus drew upon the power of intelligence and perception, and suddenly the Olympians found their strategies anticipated, their movements predicted and countered. The battle raged for days without pause. Gods and Titans do not tire as mortals do, and their fury was such that neither side would consider retreat. The plains of Thessaly became a hellscape of divine combat. Craters appeared where powerful blows struck the earth. Fires burned without fuel, sustained by divine energy. The rivers ran with ichor, the golden blood of immortals, and the water turned luminous with it. In these early engagements, it became clear that this would not be a quick war. The Titans had experience and knowledge on their side. They fought with a unity born of ages of cooperation, their strategies refined through countless smaller conflicts. Atlas, in particular, proved himself a brilliant commander. He anticipated Zeus's tactics, positioned his forces to maximize their advantages, and personally led charges that drove the Olympians back again and again. The Olympians, for all their new weapons and righteous fury, were learning warfare for the first time. Yes, Zeus had the master bolt, but when to strike and where to strike were questions that could not be answered by raw power alone. Poseidon could shake the earth, but if his earthquakes affected his own troops as much as the enemy, what good were they? The young gods had to learn tactics, had to understand the flow of battle, had to develop the instincts that would tell them when to advance and when to fall back. More than once in those early days, the Olympians found themselves forced to retreat to the slopes of Mount Olympus, using the terrain to cover their withdrawal. Zeus, frustrated by these setbacks, would hurl thunderbolts at the pursuing Titans, buying time for his forces to regroup. Hera, showing the strategic mind that would later make her such a formidable queen, began organizing their defenses, ensuring that retreats were orderly rather than chaotic routes. Yet the Olympians had advantages that would gradually tip the balance. The Hecatoncheires, the hundred-handed ones, were weapons of mass destruction on the battlefield. When they fought, rocks and boulders flew through the air like rain. Cottus, Briareus, and Gyges could each throw 100 stones simultaneously, and they did so with accuracy and devastating force. Titan formations broke under these barrages. Even Atlas, mighty as he was, had to give ground when the Hecatoncheires focused their attention on his position. The Cyclopes fought as well, using their immense strength and their mastery of craft to create tactical advantages. They forged weapons for other Olympian allies on the battlefield, adapted armor to better withstand Titan attacks, and when necessary, they fought hand-to-hand with a ferocity that belied their craftsman nature. Brontes, Steropes, and Arges had spent longer than anyone could remember imprisoned in darkness. Their rage at the Titans who had kept them captive fueled their fighting spirit. As weeks turned into months, both sides settled into a rhythm of sorts. Battles would rage for days, then both forces would withdraw to their respective mountains to rest and plan. The Titans held councils on Othrys, debating strategies, arguing about tactics. Cronus presided over these meetings, his presence a dark weight on the proceedings. He spoke less often now, his mind turning inward, obsessing over the prophecy and the sun who was proving so difficult to defeat. On Olympus, Zeus gathered his own war council. Prometheus proved invaluable here, his ability to see potential futures, allowing him to advise on strategies that might succeed. Themis brought her understanding of divine law and order, helping Zeus see patterns in the chaos of battle. Metis, the Oceanid who had helped Zeus free his siblings, offered wisdom born of deep thought and careful consideration. Together they planned, adapted, and slowly began to understand how to wage this war effectively. But understanding war and winning war are two different things. Months became years, and still neither side could gain a decisive advantage. The landscape of Thessaly became unrecognizable, transformed by divine combat into a broken, tortured terrain of craters and chasms, of fields of glass where sand had been melted by divine heat, of frozen zones where time itself seemed to have stopped. And still the war continued. 3 years into the conflict, the war had settled into a terrible pattern. Battles would erupt with world-shaking violence, rage for days or weeks, then subside into watchful peace as both sides retreated to lick their wounds and plan their next move. The initial fury had given way to grim determination. This was no longer about quick victory. This was about endurance, about who could maintain their resolve longer, about who could find the crucial advantage that would finally tip the scales. The war was taking its toll on the cosmos itself. The balance that had existed under Cronus's rule was breaking down. Weather patterns became erratic as Zeus and Hyperion's battles disrupted the normal flow of seasons. Earthquakes became commonplace as Poseidon repeatedly drove his trident into the earth. The seas rose and fell unpredictably, and coastal regions became uninhabitable as tsunamis crashed ashore without warning. The mortal world, still young and fragile, suffered terribly. The few humans who existed in this age huddled in whatever shelter they could find, praying to whichever gods might listen for the fighting to end. But the gods were too preoccupied with their war to pay attention to mortal prayers. Forests burned, farmland cracked and became desert. The very ground seemed to rebel against the creatures trying to live upon it. Zeus, in the 5th year of the war, began to change. The young god who had descended from Mount Ida full of righteous fury and idealistic dreams was hardening into something more complex. He was learning that ruling required more than power. It required cunning, patience, the ability to see 10 moves ahead. He spent long hours with Prometheus, absorbing the Titan's wisdom, learning to think strategically rather than merely react. One of Zeus's most important innovations during this period was the development of coordinated tactics among his siblings. In the early battles, each Olympian had fought largely as an individual, powerful but separate. Now Zeus began to teach them to work together. When Poseidon shook the earth, Hades would use the confusion to strike from invisibility. When Zeus called lightning from the sky, Hera and Demeter would coordinate their powers to trap fleeing Titans in killing zones. This coordination slowly began to give the Olympians an edge. But the Titans were not standing still either. Atlas, recognizing that the Hecatoncheires were perhaps the greatest threat his forces faced, developed tactics specifically to counter them. He organized strike forces that would attack the hundred-handed ones from multiple directions simultaneously, forcing them to split their attention. He positioned his strongest Titans to intercept the barrages of stones, creating shields of divine energy that could withstand even those devastating volleys. In the 6th year, a battle took place that would be remembered as the Battle of the Burning Plains. The armies clashed in a region of Thessaly that had become a desert of glass and ash from previous fighting. Zeus, seeking to break the stalemate, committed all his forces to an all-out assault. The Olympians advanced in formation, the Hecatoncheires hurling mountains worth of stone, the Cyclopes smashing through Titan lines, Zeus and his siblings leading from the front. The Titans met this assault with everything they had. Hyperion called down solar fire so intense that it turned sand to glass and glass to molten liquid. Coeus and Creus used their powers over cosmic order to try to bind the Olympians in place, to slow their advance to a crawl. Iapetus led a countercharge that nearly broke through to Zeus himself, and Atlas, magnificent in his fury, fought like a force of nature, his spear reaping terrible tolls among the Olympian forces. The battle raged for 30 days and 30 nights without pause. The sky itself seemed to crack under the strain of so much divine power being unleashed. Lightning and solar fire created a constant illumination that turned night into day and day into something brighter and more terrible. The thunder was so constant that it became a single sustained roar that drowned out all other sound. When the battle finally ended, neither side had won. The Olympians had advanced perhaps a league, but at tremendous cost. The Titans had held their ground, but had been driven back from several key positions. Both armies retreated to their mountains, exhausted even by divine standards. And for a full month afterward, there was near silence on the battlefield as both sides recovered. It was during this respite that Zeus received a visitor. Prometheus came to him in the night, his face grave. The Titan of forethought had seen something in the possible futures, something that disturbed him greatly. He told Zeus that the war could go on like this for eons. The Titans were too powerful, too experienced to be defeated by force alone. The Olympians were too determined, too well-armed to be crushed by Titan might. Without some new factor, some game-changing development, the stalemate would continue until the cosmos itself collapsed under the strain. Zeus listened and demanded to know what could break the stalemate. Prometheus's answer was not what Zeus wanted to hear. The Olympians needed to become more than just warriors. They needed to become leaders, inspirations, symbols that others could rally around. They needed to offer something the Titans never had, a vision of a better cosmos, one where justice and order balanced power, where oaths were kept and the weak were protected. They needed to win not just the war, but the peace that would follow. This conversation marked a turning point in Zeus's thinking. He began to see the war not just as a battle for supremacy, but as a struggle to define what kind of universe would exist afterward. He shared this vision with his siblings, with his allies, and slowly it took root. The Olympians began to fight not just to win, but to demonstrate the values they claimed to represent. When they took prisoners, they treated them with honor. When they made promises, they kept them. Slowly, grudgingly, some of the neutral deities who had remained apart from the conflict began to look at the Olympians with new eyes. In the 8th year of the war, a crucial development occurred. Several of the Oceanids, daughters of Oceanus who had remained neutral despite their father's tacit support of Cronus, sent emissaries to Olympus. They came offering not to fight, but to provide support, wisdom, and resources. They brought with them knowledge of ancient magic, of powers that predated even the Titans. Zeus welcomed them, and with Metis's guidance, began to learn magics that would complement his raw power. These new allies also brought intelligence. They reported that morale among the Titans was beginning to crack. Not all of them were as committed to Cronus's cause as Atlas. Some were fighting out of habit or fear rather than conviction. If the Olympians could somehow demonstrate that they were winning, that the tide had irrevocably turned, some Titans might defect or simply withdraw from the fight. Zeus seized on this information. He began planning not for another massive battle but for a decisive campaign, a series of strikes designed not just to defeat the Titans, but to break their will to fight. He gathered his war council and laid out a strategy that would require perfect coordination, immense risk, and absolute commitment from everyone involved. The plan was ambitious. The Olympians would launch simultaneous attacks on 3 fronts. Zeus would lead an assault directly at Mount Othrys itself, the first time the Olympians had dared to attack the Titan stronghold directly. Poseidon would take a force to strike at the Titan supply lines, disrupting their ability to sustain a prolonged defense. And Hades, using his helm of invisibility, would infiltrate Othrys itself and sow chaos from within. It was a plan that could win the war or lose it catastrophically. If any of the 3 prongs failed, the others would be left exposed and vulnerable. But Zeus had learned that playing it safe would only prolong the stalemate. Bold action was needed. As the 9th year of the war drew to a close, Zeus gave the order. The final campaign of the Titanomachy was about to begin. The morning of the assault dawned cold and clear, the sky a brilliant blue unmarred by clouds. It was deceptive, that peaceful sky, for it would soon become the canvas upon which the climax of the war would be painted in lightning and fire. Zeus stood at the head of his army on the slopes of Olympus, his siblings beside him, the Hecatoncheires looming behind like living mountains, the Cyclopes with their hammer-hardened fists ready for battle. Zeus raised his master bolt high, and lightning arced from it to strike the peak of Olympus. The crack of thunder that followed was the signal. The Olympians advanced not in a cautious probe or measured assault, but in an all-out charge that committed every warrior, every scrap of power, every ounce of determination they possessed. This was the moment, victory or oblivion. The Titans saw them coming. How could they not? The Olympian army was like a wave of divine fury rolling across Thessaly, kicking up dust and debris, the ground shaking with their passage. On Othrys, horns blew, rallying the Titan defenders. Atlas, ever vigilant, organized his forces with practiced efficiency. The strongest Titans took positions at key defensive points. The lesser deities who fought for Cronus formed ranks behind them, and Cronus himself emerged from his palace, his eyes burning with ancient power, ready to defend his throne. The armies crashed together at the base of Othrys with a violence that eclipsed all previous battles. This was not a skirmish or a probe. This was existential combat where defeat meant utter destruction. Zeus drove forward like a spear point, his thunderbolts striking with such rapidity that they seemed to form a solid beam of lightning. Titans fell before him, their armor shattered, their bodies convulsing from the electrical discharge. Those who tried to block his bolts found their weapons melted, their shields reduced to slag. Hera fought beside him, and though she lacked the offensive weapons of her brothers, she proved herself a warrior queen. She commanded the Olympian forces with cool precision, directing reinforcements to weak points, pulling back units that were in danger of being overwhelmed, maintaining order in the chaos. Her strategic mind, combined with her natural authority, made her invaluable in the heat of battle. Demeter unleashed the power of the earth itself against the Titans. Where she walked, vines erupted from the ground to entangle Titan feet. Roots thick as tree trunks burst through stone to trip advancing warriors. She showed that the harvest goddess was also the goddess of nature's wrath, and nature could be as cruel as any storm when properly motivated. Meanwhile, on another front, Poseidon executed his part of the plan with devastating effectiveness. He had taken a force including several Oceanids who knew the hidden paths through water and stone, and they struck at the Titans from an unexpected direction. Poseidon drove his trident into an underground river, and the resulting flood washed away supply caches that the Titans had been accumulating for years. Without food, without the ambrosia and nectar that sustained them, the Titans would weaken. But Poseidon did not stop there. He caused earthquakes along the routes the Titans used to bring reinforcements to Othrys, making the paths impassable. He summoned sea creatures, krakens, and leviathans from the deepest trenches and sent them to harass any Titan who tried to use water routes. The sea god was making it clear that his domain would not serve the enemy's purposes. The third prong of the attack was perhaps the most audacious. Hades, cloaked in invisibility by his dark helm, had infiltrated Mount Othrys itself. He moved through the Titan stronghold like a ghost, unseen and unsensed, seeking targets of opportunity. He found armories and made the weapons brittle with a touch of death. He found food stores and tainted them with decay. He whispered in the ears of uncertain titans, playing on their doubts, making them question whether Cronus could really win this war. More than that, Hades was gathering intelligence. He moved through Cronus's palace, listening to war councils, learning of Titan strategies and plans. He discovered that not all Titans were as committed as Atlas. Some were weary of the war, tired of the endless fighting, longing for peace, even if it meant surrendering to the Olympians. This information was invaluable, and Hades found ways to pass it back to Zeus through intermediaries who would not compromise his position. Back on the main battlefield, the fighting had reached a fever pitch. The Hecatoncheires had advanced to the slopes of Othrys itself and were bombarding the mountain with a barrage of stone that sounded like continuous thunder. Boulders the size of houses flew through the air. Some were intercepted by Titan defenses, shattered by blasts of divine power. But many got through, slamming into fortifications, toppling towers, creating avalanches of broken rock. Atlas knew that if Othrys fell, the war was over. He personally led a counter-assault against the Hecatoncheires, gathering the mightiest Titans around him. The clash between Atlas and Briareus, mightiest of the 100-handed ones, was like a collision between moving mountains. Atlas's spear struck again and again, each blow strong enough to shatter granite. But Briareus had 100 hands, and while some blocked and parried, others reached out to grapple, to pull, to strike back. It was a battle of endurance, and even Atlas's legendary stamina was tested. Hyperion, blazing with solar radiance, took to the sky to counter Zeus. The Titan of Light and his divine grandson met in aerial combat, trading thunderbolts and solar beams. When Zeus's lightning struck, Hyperion's light absorbed some of the impact. When Hyperion's solar fire lanced down, Zeus's storm clouds diffused it. They spiraled around each other, climbing higher into the atmosphere, each seeking the advantage of position. But Zeus had been training for 9 years for this moment. He had learned to control his power with precision, to strike not just with raw force, but with tactical intelligence. He feinted high, then struck low. He called lightning from 3 directions simultaneously, forcing Hyperion to split his defenses. And when the Titan's guard dropped for just an instant, Zeus struck with the full power of the Master Bolt. The thunderbolt hit Hyperion square in the chest, and the Titan of Light fell from the sky like a meteor. He crashed into Othrys with such force that a crater formed, and the mountain itself shuddered. Hyperion was not dead, for Titans are not so easily slain, but he was defeated, broken, unable to continue the fight. The Titan forces watched their champion fall, and morale wavered. Cronus saw this and knew he could wait no longer. The king of the Titans emerged fully from his palace, and his presence on the battlefield was like a dark sun rising. Where Zeus represented lightning and storm, Cronus embodied time itself. Around him, the very flow of moments seemed to slow and stutter. Warriors who approached him aged decades in seconds, their strength failing, their movements becoming sluggish. This was the power that had ruled the cosmos for eons, and it was terrifying to behold. Zeus saw his father entering the fray and felt a cold determination settle over him. This was the moment the entire war had been building toward. Father against son, old order against new, the prophecy reaching its inevitable conclusion. Zeus called out to Cronus, his voice carrying across the battlefield despite the chaos and noise. "Cronus, king of the Titans, your reign ends today. Face me and let us settle this." Cronus's laugh was bitter and cold. "You think yourself my equal, boy? You are a child playing with powers you do not understand. I should have swallowed you when I had the chance. I will not make the same mistake twice." They came together in the heart of the battlefield, and where they met, reality itself seemed to strain. Zeus struck with his thunderbolt, and Cronus deflected it with a gesture, sending the lightning spiraling off into the sky. Cronus aged the ground beneath Zeus's feet, trying to make it collapse into dust. But Zeus leaped away, moving with speed born of desperation and determination. They traded blows that would have destroyed mountains. Zeus's lightning scorched the earth. Cronus's temporal manipulation created zones where time flowed backward or stood still entirely. The other combatants gave them wide berth, for to be caught in the crossfire of such titans would mean destruction, even for divine beings. Zeus realized he could not defeat his father through raw power alone. Cronus had ruled too long, accumulated too much strength. He needed to be clever, needed to use every advantage. He began to lead Cronus on a chase across the battlefield, drawing him away from his supporters, toward where Zeus's siblings waited in ambush. Cronus, enraged and focused solely on destroying his rebellious son, did not notice the trap until it was sprung. Poseidon erupted from beneath the earth, his trident driving upward to knock Cronus off balance. Hades appeared from nowhere, invisible no longer, his sword striking for vulnerable points in Cronus's defenses. Hera used her own considerable power to bind Cronus's arms, if only for a moment. Demeter caused the ground to open beneath him, trying to trap him. Cronus roared in fury and broke free, his power surging. He struck Poseidon, sending the sea god flying. He aged Demeter's vines to dust. He shattered Hera's bindings. But in defending against these attacks, he had to turn away from Zeus. And Zeus did not waste the opportunity. The master bolt, charged with every ounce of power Zeus could channel, every bit of righteous fury and desperate hope, flew from his hand. It struck Cronus in the back, and the Titan king screamed. The bolt did not kill him, could not kill him, but it burned through his defenses, shattered his concentration, broke his will to fight. Cronus fell to his knees, and in that moment, the Titan forces saw their king defeated. The psychological impact was instantaneous and devastating. The Titans had fought for 9 years, believing that Cronus was invincible, that his power was absolute. Seeing him brought low, seeing him kneeling before his son, broke something in them. Some threw down their weapons immediately. Others tried to continue fighting, but their hearts were no longer in it. The cohesion of the Titan army dissolved like mist before the sun. Atlas, seeing the battle lost, made one last desperate charge. He gathered those Titans still willing to fight and led them in a suicidal assault on Zeus's position, determined that if he was going down, he would take the Olympian leader with him. But the Hecatoncheires intercepted him, and though Atlas fought with superhuman ferocity, not even he could stand against all 3 of the 100-handed ones at once. Cottus, Briareus, and Gyges surrounded Atlas, and rocks flew from their many hands in a storm of stone. Atlas blocked and dodged, his spear whirling in a defensive pattern, but there were too many projectiles coming from too many angles. One struck his leg, staggering him. Another hit his shoulder, making him drop his spear. A third caught him in the head, and the mighty Titan fell. The battle was over. Those Titans who had not surrendered fled, and the Olympians let them go, too exhausted to pursue. The slopes of Othrys were littered with the fallen, wounded gods and Titans lying in heaps, divine ichor staining the ground. The mountain itself was scarred and broken, towers collapsed, walls breached, the seat of Titan power reduced to ruins. Zeus stood over his father, the master bolt still crackling in his hand. Cronus looked up at him, and in the Titan king's eyes was not fear or anger, but a kind of resigned understanding. The prophecy had come true. The cycle had continued. As Cronus had overthrown Uranus, so Zeus had overthrown Cronus. "Do it," Cronus whispered. "End it. Kill me and take your throne." But Zeus surprised him. "No, you will not die, father. That would be too easy, too quick. You will live, and you will remember this day. You will remember how you were defeated by the son you tried to destroy. And perhaps in time, you will come to understand that this had to be." With those words, Zeus signaled to the Hecatoncheires, and they moved forward to take Cronus into custody. The war, after 10 long years of unimaginable destruction and suffering, was finally over. The Olympians had won. A new age was about to begin. The aftermath of the great battle left all parties exhausted. The battlefield of Thessaly was a wasteland, unrecognizable from the fertile land it had once been. Smoke rose from countless fires. The ground was broken and torn, great chasms opening into darkness below. The sky itself seemed wounded, hanging heavy and gray over the scene of devastation. But despite the exhaustion, there was work to be done. The victors had to decide the fate of the vanquished. Zeus called a great council on the slopes of Mount Olympus. All the Olympians gathered, along with those Titans who had fought for Zeus or remained neutral, the Cyclopes, the Hecatoncheires, and various other deities who had supported the winning side. The question before them was simple to state, but complex to answer. What should be done with the defeated Titans? Some argued for harsh punishment. These Titans had fought to maintain a tyrannical order, had tried to prevent the natural evolution of divine rule, had caused 10 years of suffering and destruction. They should be made to pay for their crimes. Others counseled mercy, pointing out that many Titans had fought simply out of loyalty to family, not out of genuine belief in Cronus's cause. To punish them too harshly might sow the seeds of future conflict. Zeus listened to all arguments, but in his heart, he had already made his decision. The defeated Titans would be imprisoned, removed from power so they could never again threaten the new order. But they would not be destroyed or tortured. Zeus had learned from his father's mistakes. Cruelty for its own sake had been Uranus's downfall and had poisoned Cronus's reign. The new order would be different. Justice would be served, but it would be tempered with wisdom. The sentence was pronounced. The Titans who had actively fought against the Olympians would be cast into Tartarus, that deepest pit far below the earth, the same prison where Uranus had once confined the Cyclopes and Hecatoncheires. But this time, the imprisonment would not be cruel isolation. The Titans would be together, able to speak with one another, to exist in a kind of half-life that was neither full freedom nor absolute suffering. Cronus, as the leader of the defeated faction, received no special treatment. He was chained with adamantine bonds, the same unbreakable material from which his sickle had been forged. The symbolism was not lost on anyone. The weapon that had won him his throne would now be the substance of his imprisonment. He was led down into the depths of Tartarus, and though he went without fighting, there was a terrible dignity in his bearing. He had been king, and even in defeat, he carried himself with the bearing of royalty. With Cronus went many of the mightiest Titans. Hyperion, still wounded from his battle with Zeus, was carried down into darkness. Iapetus, father of Prometheus, but loyal to Cronus to the end, descended with his head held high. Calypso and Crius, the cosmic pillars, found themselves confined where their ordering principles could no longer shape the universe. Oceanus, who had remained neutral but had tacitly supported Cronus, was spared imprisonment, but was stripped of much of his authority. He would remain in his realm, the great river encircling the world, but he would no longer have a voice in the governance of the cosmos. The Hecatoncheires were given the task of guarding the prisoners. It was fitting in a way. They had been imprisoned by Uranus, kept captive by Cronus, and now they would serve as the jailers. But there was a difference. They served not out of compulsion but by choice, and they were honored for their service. Zeus decreed that they would be revered among the gods, that their names would be spoken with respect, and that they would want for nothing in their role as guardians. The 100-handed ones took up their posts at the gates of Tartarus, and none would ever pass them without permission. When they stood watch, their 50 heads could see in all directions, and their 100 hands could strike any who dared approach. The imprisoned Titans, looking up from their confinement, could see the Hecatoncheires silhouetted against the distant light, a constant reminder that escape was impossible. But not all Titans were imprisoned. Those who had remained neutral, like Oceanus, were allowed to keep their domains, though with reduced authority. The female Titans, the Titanesses, were largely spared imprisonment. Rhea, mother of the Olympians, was honored despite her marriage to Cronus. Themis, who had sided with Zeus, was elevated to a position of high authority, becoming the goddess of divine law and order in the new regime. Mnemosyne, goddess of memory, was also spared, and Zeus would later father the 9 muses with her. Some of the Titans' children were also spared, or even honored. Prometheus, who had sided with Zeus from the beginning, was given a position of respect among the new gods. His gift of forethought made him valuable as an advisor, though later events would complicate his relationship with Zeus. Epimetheus, Prometheus's brother, was allowed to remain free despite his initial support of Cronus, though he was regarded with some suspicion. But for Atlas, Zeus reserved a special punishment. The general of the Titan armies, the warrior who had led the fight against the Olympians, with such skill and determination, could not be simply imprisoned like the others. His strength was too great, his spirit too fierce. Even in chains, he might find a way to cause trouble. No, Atlas needed a punishment that would occupy him completely, that would use his strength against him, that would serve as a constant reminder of his defeat. Zeus decreed that Atlas would hold up the sky. The heavens, which had once been personified by Uranus, now existed as a physical dome over the earth, and that dome was crushingly heavy. Atlas was positioned at the western edge of the world, where the sun set each evening, and upon his shoulders was placed the weight of the heavens. He stood there, legs braced, back bent, arms stretched upward, supporting the sky itself. It was not a task that would kill him, for Titans cannot die, but it was one that would never end. Every moment, Atlas felt the weight pressing down on him. Every second, his muscles strained to hold the burden. He could not sleep, could not rest, could not even shift his position more than slightly for fear of dropping the sky and bringing catastrophe to the world below. It was a punishment perfectly calibrated to his strength. A weaker being would have been crushed instantly, but Atlas was strong enough to bear it, and so he would bear it forever. Some say that Atlas wept as the sky was placed upon his shoulders, tears of rage and frustration running down his face. Others claim he accepted his fate with stoic silence, his eyes burning with hatred for Zeus but his lips sealed shut. However he reacted, the result was the same. Atlas became a living pillar, holding heaven and earth apart, his punishment a warning to any who might think to rebel against the new order. With the Titans dealt with, Zeus turned his attention to organizing his victory. The cosmos needed to be divided, responsibilities assigned, a new hierarchy established. The old order was gone. The golden age of Cronus was over. Now began what would later be called the Age of the Olympians, and it would be characterized by different principles, different values, different ways of relating to both mortals and each other. The division of the cosmos, 3 brothers, 3 realms. With victory achieved and the Titans secured, the most crucial decision facing the Olympians was how to divide the cosmos among themselves. The universe was vast, containing many realms and domains, and the 6 children of Cronus and Rhea needed to determine who would rule what. This was a delicate matter, one that could potentially sow discord among the victors if not handled properly. A council was convened in the great hall that was being constructed atop Mount Olympus. The 6 siblings gathered around a central fire, and the discussion began. It was clear from the start that Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, as the male offspring and the ones who had led the military campaign, would take the 3 greatest realms. But which realm would go to which brother? Hestia, as the eldest, spoke first. She had no desire to rule any realm. Her domain was the hearth, the center of home and family, and she was content with that. She would tend the sacred fire of Olympus, and every home would honor her in their own hearths. This was enough for her, and her siblings respected her wisdom and her choice. Demeter similarly expressed satisfaction with her dominion over the harvest and the earth's fertility. She would ensure that the crops grew and that life continued. Hera, however, made it clear that she expected to be queen. Whichever brother ruled the heavens, she would be his queen and equal partner. This left Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades to divide the 3 great realms: the sky, the sea, and the underworld. Each realm came with its own powers, its own responsibilities, its own unique character. The sky was the most visible domain, the one from which the ruler could see all and influence all. The sea covered most of the world's surface and held mysteries and powers beyond counting. The underworld was dark and grim, but it was also the destination of all mortal souls, and thus held a different kind of power. Zeus, as the one who had orchestrated the victory, might have simply claimed the realm he wanted, but he knew that to do so would breed resentment. Poseidon had fought with tremendous valor. His contributions to the victory were undeniable. Hades had infiltrated Othrys, had struck from the shadows, had done things that required a courage of a different kind than battlefield heroics. Both deserved respect, deserved to feel that they had been treated fairly, and so Zeus proposed that they draw lots. 3 tokens would be prepared, 1 for each realm, and placed in a helmet. Each brother would draw blindly, and fate would decide who ruled where. It was a solution that placed the decision in the hands of destiny rather than personal preference or power politics. Poseidon and Hades agreed, though Poseidon did so somewhat reluctantly. He had hoped to negotiate for the sky, seeing it as the most prestigious domain. The tokens were prepared. They were inscribed with symbols: a lightning bolt for the sky, a wave for the sea, and a flame for the underworld. Hestia, as the eldest and one who would rule no realm, was chosen to hold the helmet and administer the drawing. The three brothers stood before her, and one by one, they reached into the helmet. Zeus drew first. His hand closed around a token, and when he pulled it out and opened his palm, there gleamed the lightning bolt. The sky would be his. He would rule from the heights of Olympus, would command the storms and weather, would be king of the gods. If Zeus felt satisfaction at this result, he kept it from his face. This was meant to be random after all, and to show too much pleasure might suggest the drawing had been rigged. Poseidon drew next, and his token bore the wave. The seas would be his domain. All the oceans, all the rivers that fed into them, all the creatures that swam in those depths would acknowledge him as their master. Poseidon looked at the token for a long moment. It was not what he had hoped for, but the sea was a vast and powerful realm, and ruling it would be no small thing. He nodded acceptance. That left Hades with the underworld by default, though he drew his token anyway for the sake of form. When he looked at the flame symbol, his expression was unreadable. The underworld was the realm no one wanted, the place of death and shadows, far from the light and glory of Olympus. But Hades was not one to complain or argue. He had always been the quietest of the siblings, the most introspective, and perhaps ruling the land of the dead suited his temperament. With the lots drawn, the division was made official. Zeus would rule the sky and would be king of the gods, first among equals, the one to whom others would look for leadership and final judgment. He would make his throne atop Olympus, the highest peak in Greece, where he could look down upon the whole world. His symbols would be the lightning bolt, the eagle, and the oak tree. His word would be law, his justice would be final, and his power would be the greatest among the gods. Poseidon would rule the seas, and he set about claiming his domain with enthusiasm. He descended to the ocean floor and fashioned for himself a palace of coral and pearl, with walls of crystal through which the water's light filtered in beautiful patterns. He gathered the sea nymphs and gods of the ocean to him, established his authority over every wave and current, and made it known that any who sailed upon his waters did so with his permission. His symbols became the trident, the horse, and the dolphin. His temperament was like the sea itself, sometimes calm and beautiful, sometimes tempestuous and destructive. Hades took possession of the underworld, and though it was a grim realm, he set about organizing it with quiet efficiency. He established rules for how souls would be judged, created different regions for different types of dead, and ensured that the cycle of death would function smoothly. He rarely left his realm, finding a kind of peace in its stillness and inevitability. His symbols were the helmet of invisibility, the cypress tree, and the screech owl. He was not evil, as later tales would sometimes portray him, but he was stern and unyielding, for death is the one thing that comes to all mortals and from which there is no escape. The three brothers agreed that the earth itself, the mortal world, would be common ground. All three could walk upon it, could influence its affairs, could interact with the mortals who lived there. This prevented any one brother from having complete dominion and ensured that they would need to cooperate and coordinate their actions regarding the mortal realm. But the creation of this new divine hierarchy was not without its tensions. Poseidon, despite his agreement to the lot drawing, harbored some resentment about not getting the sky. He felt that as the elder brother, he should have had priority, that Zeus's youth made him less suited to be king. These feelings would simmer beneath the surface and would occasionally boil over into conflicts between the brothers in the years to come. Hades, meanwhile, grew increasingly isolated in his underworld realm. The other gods did not like visiting the land of the dead, finding it depressing and ominous. Hades found himself alone more often than not, with only the souls of the deceased for company. This isolation would shape his character, making him even more withdrawn and somber, though no less powerful or important to the functioning of the cosmos. But these were problems for the future. In the immediate aftermath of the Titanomachy, there was a sense of hope and possibility. The old order had been overthrown. A new age was beginning. The younger gods had proven themselves worthy of rule. Now came the work of actually ruling, of creating the kind of cosmos they had fought for. of living up to the ideals that had sustained them through 10 years of brutal warfare. With the division of realms settled, Zeus turned his attention to establishing the infrastructure of his reign. Mount Olympus was to be the center of the new order, the place where the gods would gather, where councils would be held, where justice would be dispensed. But Olympus was more than just a mountain. It was to be a statement, a symbol of the power and majesty of the new regime. The Cyclopes, those master craftsmen who had forged the weapons that won the war, were commissioned to build palaces atop Olympus. They labored with joy, finally free to practice their craft without fear or oppression. The structures they created were marvels of divine architecture. Zeus's palace was the grandest, a sprawling complex of marble and gold, with columns that seemed to reach to the heavens themselves. At its center was a throne room where Zeus would sit in judgment, the walls decorated with scenes of the Titanomachy, ensuring that none would forget how this victory had been won. Each of the Olympians received their own palace, scaled to their preferences and domains. Poseidon's palace on Olympus was smaller than Zeus's, for he spent most of his time in his undersea realm, but it was beautifully appointed with fountains and pools that mimicked the ocean's rhythms. Hera's palace, joined to Zeus's by a grand corridor, was a place of regal beauty, every detail speaking of queenly authority and feminine power. Demeter's residence was surrounded by gardens that bloomed in impossible profusion, a taste of her domain brought to the heights. Hestia claimed no palace, instead tending the central hearth of Olympus, around which all the other structures were arranged. This hearth burned with an eternal flame, and it became the sacred center of the divine community. Oaths sworn before this fire were unbreakable. Councils held around it were sanctified. It was in many ways the heart of Olympus, and Hestia's tending of it made her essential despite her lack of a political role. Hades received a palace on Olympus as well, though he rarely used it. He preferred his realm in the underworld, and when he did visit Olympus, it was usually for official business rather than social occasions. His palace stood somewhat apart from the others, shrouded more often in shadow than light, a reflection of its owner's domain and temperament. Zeus also needed to populate his court, to create a system of governance that could manage the complexities of ruling the cosmos. He called to Olympus all those who had aided him in the war, granting them positions and honors. Themis, the titaness of divine law, became one of his most trusted advisors, helping to codify the rules by which the gods would govern themselves and interact with mortals. Her wisdom ensured that justice, not merely power, would be the foundation of the new order. Prometheus, despite being a titan by birth, was honored for his support and his wisdom. Zeus recognized that Prometheus's ability to see potential futures made him invaluable, though the relationship between them would later sour. For now, though, Prometheus was welcomed at Olympus and consulted on major decisions. The Cyclopes were given a forge deep within Mount Olympus, where they could continue their craft. They would forge weapons and tools for the gods, create items of power and beauty, and serve as the divine smiths. Their status was elevated from prisoners to honored craftsmen, a dramatic reversal of their fortunes under the previous regime. The Hecatoncheires, though their primary role was guarding Tartarus, were also honored. Shrines were established in their name, and sacrifices were offered to them. They became symbols of loyal service and of the fact that even the most fearsome beings could find a place in the new order if they chose the right side. Zeus then set about fathering children who would become the next generation of Olympians. His first wife was Metis, the Oceanid of wisdom who had helped him free his siblings. She became pregnant, but Prometheus warned Zeus of a prophecy. Metis would bear 2 children, first a daughter, then a son, and the son would be greater than his father and would overthrow him. The curse of Uranus was repeating itself, the cycle threatening to continue. Zeus, determined to break this cycle but unwilling to kill Metis, instead swallowed her whole, just as Cronus had swallowed his children. But where Cronus had acted out of paranoid fear, Zeus acted with calculated purpose. Metis would live within him, her wisdom becoming his wisdom, advising him from within. And when the time came, her daughter would be born in an unusual way, emerging fully grown from Zeus's head. This would be Athena, goddess of wisdom and warfare, born not from Metis's womb, but from Zeus's mind. Zeus's next major union was with Themis, and together they produced the Herae, goddesses of the seasons and natural order, and the Moirae, the Fates who controlled the destinies of gods and mortals alike. With Mnemosyne, goddess of memory, Zeus fathered the 9 muses, who would inspire art and knowledge throughout the ages. With various other partners, both divine and mortal, Zeus would father a multitude of children, many of whom would become important gods and heroes. Hera, meanwhile, grew increasingly frustrated. She had expected to be Zeus's only wife, to rule beside him as queen and equal. Instead, she found herself one of many consorts, albeit the most important. This would become a defining tension of the Olympian age. Hera's jealousy and Zeus's infidelity, a conflict that would play out in countless myths and cause suffering for many of Zeus's lovers and children. Poseidon in his ocean realm also took a wife, Amphitrite, a sea nymph of great beauty. Together they ruled the waves, and Poseidon fathered numerous children, including Triton, the merman herald of the sea. Poseidon also had many affairs, both with divine beings and mortals, and his children included both gods and monsters, heroes and villains. Hades eventually claimed a queen as well, though in a manner that would cause controversy. He abducted Persephone, daughter of Demeter, taking her to the underworld to be his bride. Demeter's grief at her daughter's loss caused the first winter, as she neglected her duties and the earth became barren. Eventually, a compromise was reached. Persephone would spend part of the year in the underworld with Hades and part on earth with her mother, creating the cycle of seasons. This myth would become central to Greek understanding of death, rebirth, and the agricultural year. As the Olympians established their reign, they also began to interact more directly with mortals. Humanity had survived the Titanomachy, though barely. The war had devastated the earth, and many humans had died from its effects. But life is resilient, and humanity recovered. The Olympians took an interest in these mortals in a way that the Titans never had. They intervened in human affairs, fathered children with human lovers, offered blessings and curses, and generally made themselves far more present in the mortal world. This increased interaction led to the heroic age, when demigods walked the earth and performed great deeds. Heroes like Heracles, Perseus, Theseus, and many others were born from unions between gods and mortals. These heroes would undertake quests, slay monsters, found cities, and generally serve as intermediaries between the divine and mortal realms. They would also become the subjects of countless stories, their deeds celebrated in poetry and song, their names remembered long after their deaths. The Olympian age was characterized by a more dynamic, more engaged divine presence than had existed under the Titans. Where Cronus had ruled with a distant hand, content to let the world function according to natural law, Zeus and his siblings were active participants in shaping events. This made for a more chaotic cosmos in some ways, but also a more vibrant one, where anything seemed possible. Yet even as the new order solidified, threats remained. Not all the children of the Titans had been imprisoned. Typhon, a monstrous being born from Gaia and Tartarus, would later rise to challenge Zeus in a battle almost as devastating as the Titanomachy itself. The Gigantomachy, the war against the giants, would require the Olympians to prove themselves again. And always in the background, there was the knowledge that the cycle of overthrow was not necessarily broken, that Zeus himself might one day face a son who would cast him down. But these were concerns for the future. In the immediate aftermath of the Titanomachy, there was celebration. The Olympians hosted great feasts, ambrosia and nectar flowed freely, and the gods reveled in their victory. The Muses sang songs of the war, of Zeus's bravery, of Poseidon's strength, of Hades' cunning. The Cyclopes displayed their latest creations. The 100-handed ones were toasted for their loyal service. And for a time at least, peace reigned in the cosmos. The Titanomachy is far more than just a story of one group of gods defeating another. It is a myth laden with meaning, a narrative that the ancient Greeks used to explain fundamental truths about the nature of the cosmos, the progression of civilization, and the relationship between generations. To understand the Titanomachy is to understand a key piece of how the Greeks viewed their world and their place in it. At its most basic level, the Titanomachy represents generational change. The overthrow of the Titans by the Olympians mirrors the eternal tension between the old and the young, between established power and emerging forces. Every generation believes it can do better than the one before, that it has learned from past mistakes and can create a better world. The Olympians embodied this youthful confidence, this belief that change was not only possible, but necessary. Yet the myth is more nuanced than a simple tale of good versus evil. The Titans were not portrayed as wholly wicked. Cronus, for all his faults, had presided over a golden age of peace and prosperity. The Titans represented cosmic order, the fundamental forces that made the universe function. Their defeat did not mean the destruction of these principles, but rather their reorganization under new leadership. Many Titans, particularly the female ones, were integrated into the Olympian system, showing that the new order built upon rather than completely replacing the old. The cycle of overthrow that runs through the myth is particularly significant. Uranus was overthrown by Cronus, who was in turn overthrown by Zeus. Each overthrow was prompted by the father's attempt to prevent it, suggesting that efforts to avoid destiny only hasten its arrival. Uranus imprisoned his children, which led Gaia to conspire against him. Cronus swallowed his children, which led to Zeus's hidden birth and eventual rebellion. The myth seems to suggest that attempting to control the future, to prevent change through force, is ultimately futile. This theme resonated deeply with Greek society, which was itself experiencing rapid change during the period when these myths were being refined and codified. The transition from Bronze Age civilizations to the classical Greek city-states involved massive social upheaval, the overthrow of old orders, the establishment of new forms of government. The Titanomachy provided a divine precedent for this kind of change, suggesting that even the cosmos itself had undergone such transitions. The myth also explores the nature of justice and rule. Uranus ruled through fear, imprisoning those he found threatening. Cronus ruled through paranoid precaution, consuming his children to prevent prophecy. But Zeus, despite his flaws, attempted to rule through a combination of power and justice. He established divine law, honored those who served him, punished the guilty, but tried to avoid unnecessary cruelty. The progression from Uranus to Cronus to Zeus represents the evolution toward more sophisticated forms of governance. This is not to say that Zeus was portrayed as a perfect ruler. The myths are full of his flaws, his infidelity, his occasional tyrannical decisions, his conflicts with other gods. But compared to his father and grandfather, Zeus represented progress. He was willing to share power, to take counsel, to govern through institutions rather than mere personal authority. The establishment of divine law under Themis's guidance, the creation of a court of gods on Olympus, the division of realms among the three brothers, all of these suggested a more balanced, less authoritarian form of rule. The Titanomachy also served to establish the Greek gods' supremacy and to explain their position as objects of worship. The gods whom the Greeks worshipped were not primordial forces, but rather the victors of a great cosmic war. They had earned their positions through struggle and sacrifice. This made them more relatable in some ways. They were not distant, abstract principles, but beings who had fought and bled, or at least bled ichor, for their power. The role of prophecy in the myth is another significant element. The curse of Uranus, the prophecies that drove Cronus's actions, the warnings that Zeus received, all of these suggest a universe where fate and free will exist in tension with each other. The characters receive prophetic warnings and can choose how to respond, but their very responses often bring about the predicted outcomes. This paradox was central to Greek thought and appears in countless myths and tragedies. The integration of monstrous beings like the Cyclopes and Hecatoncheires into the winning coalition carries its own message. These beings had been imprisoned and vilified by Uranus and Cronus because of their appearance and power. Zeus, by freeing them and honoring them, showed a different kind of wisdom. He recognized that what matters is not appearance but character, not raw power, but how that power is used. This theme of looking beyond surface appearances to recognize true worth appears throughout Greek mythology. The imprisonment of the Titans in Tartarus, rather than their destruction, also carries significance. The old order was not erased but contained. The fundamental forces that the Titans represented, time, memory, cosmic order, could not be destroyed because they were essential to the universe's functioning. They had to be controlled, channeled, but not eliminated. This suggests a conservative element in the Greek worldview. Revolution should reorganize rather than completely destroy existing structures. The special punishment of Atlas, holding up the sky, became one of the most enduring images from the myth. Atlas represented the burden of the past, the weight of responsibility, the price of rebellion, but he also represented strength and endurance, the ability to bear seemingly impossible burdens. In later traditions, Atlas would sometimes be portrayed sympathetically, a tragic figure punished for loyalty to his family. This ambiguity is characteristic of Greek mythology, which rarely presented simple moral lessons. The story of the Titanomachy was not merely a tale told around fires or recited by bards. It was a foundational myth that permeated Greek culture, influencing art, literature, philosophy, and even politics. The ancient Greeks saw in this cosmic war a reflection of their own experiences, values, and beliefs, and they returned to it again and again in various forms. In literature, the Titanomachy appeared in multiple works, though unfortunately many have been lost to time. Hesiod's Theogony, written around 700 BCE, provides our most complete ancient account of the myth. Hesiod's version emphasizes the progression from chaos to order, from primitive violence to civilized rule. His description of the war itself is vivid and terrifying, with the earth and sea and sky all joining in the combat, creating an image of cosmic catastrophe that must have awed his audiences. Other poets and writers reference the Titanomachy in their works, using it as a point of comparison or a source of illusions. Aeschylus, in his tragedy Prometheus Bound, has Prometheus reference his role in the war and his decision to side with Zeus, a choice that makes his later punishment by Zeus all the more bitter. Euripides and Sophocles also made references to the war, using it to comment on themes of power, justice, and the relationship between generations. The myth also appeared in visual art throughout the Greek world. Temple decorations, pottery paintings, and sculptures depicted scenes from the Titanomachy. The Parthenon in Athens, the greatest temple of classical Greece, included references to the conflict in its sculptural program, linking Athenian power and civilization to the Olympian victory. The choice to include the Titanomachy alongside other foundational myths like the Trojan War emphasized its importance to Greek identity. One of the most significant artistic representations was the altar of Zeus at Pergamon, built in the 2nd century BCE. This massive structure featured a frieze depicting the Gigantomachy, the later war between the Olympians and the giants, which was seen as a kind of sequel to the Titanomachy. The sculptures showed gods and monsters locked in violent combat, with incredible detail and dynamism. Though the Gigantomachy was a different conflict, it was understood within the context of the earlier war, showing how the Olympians had to continue defending their rule against challenges. Pottery from various periods shows scenes that may depict the Titanomachy, though identifying specific battles is sometimes difficult due to the lack of written labels. Vase paintings show giants and gods in combat, lightning bolts flying, figures falling from great heights. These images brought the myth to life for everyday Greeks, who would see these decorated vessels in use at symposiums and religious ceremonies. In philosophy, the Titanomachy was sometimes interpreted allegorically. Later Greek and Roman philosophers saw in the conflict a representation of cosmic principles at war. The Titans might represent raw nature or primal chaos, while the Olympians represented reason, order, and civilization. This interpretation fit well with philosophical views that saw the cosmos as a battleground between ordering principles and chaotic forces, with humanity's role being to align itself with order. The Stoic philosophers in particular found meaning in the myth. They saw Zeus as representing divine reason or logos, the organizing principle of the universe. The Titans represented the passionate, irrational forces that had to be overcome for true wisdom to prevail. The Stoic ideal of living in accordance with nature and reason could be understood as aligning oneself with the Olympian order rather than the Titan chaos. The political implications of the myth were not lost on the Greeks either. When cities or rulers wanted to legitimize their power, they would sometimes invoke the Titanomachy as a precedent. The message was clear: established orders can be overthrown if they become tyrannical, and new orders can establish legitimacy through victory and just rule. Athens, in particular, used imagery from the Titanomachy to present itself as bringing order and civilization to the Greek world. much as Zeus had brought order to the cosmos. The myth also influenced how Greeks understood their own history. The progression from Titans to Olympians paralleled, in Greek thought, the progression from the Bronze Age to the Iron Age, from the Age of Heroes to the historical period. The Titanomachy marked a cosmic transition point, just as various historical events mark transition points in human history. The Greeks saw themselves as living in the age established by the Olympian victory under the rule of the gods who had won that great war. Religious practices also reflected the myth's importance. Festivals and rituals often recalled the Titanomachy, reminding worshippers of how the gods they honored had earned their positions. Sacrifices to Zeus, Poseidon, and other Olympians were, in a sense, thank offerings for the establishment of the current cosmic order. The myth provided a narrative framework for understanding why these particular gods deserved worship. The Titanomachy also influenced mystery cults and initiatory rites. The descent into Tartarus, the imprisonment and release of divine beings, the transformation of the cosmos, all of these elements found echoes in mystery religions that promised initiates secret knowledge about death, rebirth, and cosmic truths. The Eleusinian mysteries, for example, included elements that may have drawn on Titanomachy themes, particularly the story of Persephone's abduction to the underworld. In Roman culture, after Greece was absorbed into the Roman Empire, the Titanomachy remained significant. Roman poets like Ovid retold the story, adapting it to Roman sensibilities. The Romans identified their own gods with Greek ones, Jupiter with Zeus, Neptune with Poseidon, Pluto with Hades, and thus inherited the mythological tradition that included the Titanomachy. Roman art and literature continued to reference the myth, ensuring its transmission to later Western culture. The influence of the Titanomachy extended beyond the ancient world. Renaissance artists, rediscovering classical mythology, returned to themes from the war. Paintings depicted Atlas holding up the heavens, Zeus hurling thunderbolts, the Titans chained in Tartarus. These images became part of the visual vocabulary of Western art, symbols that carried meaning even for audiences who might not know the full story. In modern times, the Titanomachy continues to fascinate. It appears in novels, films, video games, and other media, often reinterpreted for contemporary audiences. Sometimes it is presented as a straightforward battle between good and evil. Other times, modern retellings emphasize its more ambiguous elements, questioning whether the Olympians were truly better than the Titans they overthrew. These reinterpretations show the myth's continuing relevance and adaptability, its ability to speak to different ages and different concerns. The myth has also influenced political discourse, with titanic struggles and overthrowing old orders becoming common metaphors. Revolutionaries have sometimes invoked the imagery of the Titanomachy to justify their actions, presenting themselves as the new gods overthrowing a corrupt old regime. Conversely, defenders of tradition have warned against the chaos that comes from rejecting established order, pointing to the devastation of the 10-year war. In psychology, the myth has been interpreted as representing internal conflicts. Carl Jung and other depth psychologists saw in the war between Titans and Olympians a representation of the conflict between unconscious, instinctual forces and conscious, rational mind. The victory of the Olympians represents the ego's establishment of control over primal drives, though those drives remain present, imprisoned but not destroyed, in the unconscious depths. The scientific community has even borrowed from the myth. Saturn's moon Titan takes its name from the mythological beings, as do several other moons in the solar system named after individual titans. The term Titanic has entered common language to mean something massive, powerful, and potentially overwhelming, a direct inheritance from the beings who once ruled the cosmos. The immediate aftermath of the Titanomachy was a period of both celebration and reconstruction. The cosmos had been shattered by 10 years of divine warfare, and it needed to be rebuilt, reorganized, and reordered. This was a task that would occupy the Olympians for centuries as they worked to create the world that would become familiar to the Greeks, and through them, to all of Western civilization. One of the first priorities was healing the physical damage. The battlefield of Thessaly was a wasteland, its landscape transformed by divine combat into something barely recognizable. Zeus, Poseidon, and Demeter worked together to restore some semblance of normalcy. Poseidon calmed the seas that had been whipped into permanent frenzy by the war's battles. Demeter coaxed plant life back into existence, slowly greening the scorched earth. Zeus cleared the skies, allowing proper weather patterns to resume. But some scars remained. The geography of Greece itself had been permanently altered by the war. Mountains had been moved or destroyed. Valleys had been created where none existed before. Rivers had changed their courses. The Greeks who later settled these lands would tell stories about how these features came to be, attributing them to the battles between gods and titans. That oddly shaped mountain, a boulder thrown by a Hecatoncheire. That deep chasm, the place where Poseidon drove his trident into the earth during a crucial battle. The divine community also needed to reorganize itself. The Olympian Council was formally established, with Zeus as its head, but with other gods having voices and votes on important matters. This was different from Cronus's rule, where decisions had been made by fiat. Zeus was learning, slowly and sometimes painfully, that ruling through consultation and consensus was more stable than ruling through pure authority. The council included the 12 major Olympians, though the exact list would shift over time. Initially, it consisted of Zeus, Hera, Poseidon, Demeter, Hestia, and Hades, along with some of the titans who had sided with Zeus, like Themis. As Zeus had more children, they would join the council. Athena, Apollo, Artemis, Ares, Aphrodite, Hermes, Hephaestus, and eventually Dionysus would displace Hestia, who willingly gave up her seat to avoid conflict. The relationship between the Olympians and mortals was another area that needed defining. Under the Titans, mortals had been largely left to their own devices. The gods had existed in a separate realm, with little direct interaction. But the Olympians were different. They were interested in mortals, fascinated by them, and often interfered in their affairs. This would lead to the age of heroes, but it would also lead to suffering, as mortals became pawns in divine games and conflicts. Zeus established rules for how gods could interact with mortals. They could father children with humans, but those children would be mortal, not fully divine. They could grant blessings or curses, but not arbitrarily. There had to be a reason, whether the mortal had pleased or offended them. They could intervene in human affairs, but they should not make mortals mere puppets. These rules were not always followed perfectly, but they represented an attempt to create order in divine-mortal relations. The establishment of fate was another crucial development. The Moirae, the Fates, Clotho, Lachesis, and Atropos, were given the role of determining the lifespans and destinies of mortals, and to some extent, even gods. Even Zeus, king of the gods, was bound by fate's decrees. This represented a profound philosophical point. There were limits to divine power, forces that even the gods could not simply override. The universe had laws that applied to all. The creation of more structured justice was another important consequence. Themis established divine law, but her daughter Dike became the personification of justice itself. The Erinyes, who had been born from Uranus's blood when Cronus castrated him, were given a more defined role as punishers of certain crimes, particularly those against family. The Greeks would later refine this into a legal system, but its divine precedent was established in the post-Titanomachy era. Prometheus's role in helping humanity would also develop during this period, though it would lead to his eventual punishment. Seeing mortals struggling in the New World Order, Prometheus felt compassion. He stole fire from the gods and gave it to humanity, along with teaching them various arts and crafts. This act of defiance angered Zeus, who saw it as undermining divine authority. Prometheus would be chained to a rock, an eagle eating his liver daily, only for it to regrow each night, a punishment almost as eternal as Atlas's burden. The punishment of Prometheus showed that the new order, while more just than the old, still had its cruel aspects. Zeus could be generous and wise, but he could also be vengeful and harsh when he felt his authority was challenged. This complexity made the Olympians more interesting than simple paragons of virtue. They were powerful beings with flaws, capable of both great good and great evil. The relationship between the three brother kings, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, also developed its own dynamics in the aftermath of the war. Zeus's position as king of the gods sometimes chafed Poseidon, who felt that as the elder brother, he deserved more respect and authority. Several times Poseidon would rebel or conspire against Zeus, though these attempts always failed. Hades, isolated in his underworld realm, rarely involved himself in these conflicts, but his relationship with the other Olympians grew increasingly distant. The wives of the three brothers also developed significant roles. Hera became queen of the gods, though her relationship with Zeus was troubled by his infidelities. She became associated with marriage and family, ironically given Zeus's constant betrayals. Amphitrite ruled beside Poseidon in the ocean depths, generally more stable in her marriage than Hera was in hers. Persephone, once she became Hades' queen, brought a softening influence to the underworld, showing mercy where Hades showed only stern justice. The mortal world flourished under the new order, despite occasional divine interference. Cities were founded, civilization developed, art and culture bloomed. The Greeks saw this progress as a direct result of the Olympian victory. The Titans had presided over a static golden age, but the Olympians brought dynamism, change, and the possibility of progress. Yes, this also brought conflict and suffering, but it brought the potential for greatness as well. The heroic age that followed the Titanomachy was characterized by individuals of extraordinary ability, usually demigods, who performed great deeds. Heracles performed his 12 labors, proving himself worthy of immortality. Perseus slew Medusa and rescued Andromeda. Theseus defeated the Minotaur and unified Attica. Jason and the Argonauts sought the Golden Fleece. These heroes acted as intermediaries between gods and mortals, showing what humans could achieve when touched by divine power. But the heroic age would eventually give way to the age of ordinary mortals, as the gods gradually withdrew from direct involvement in human affairs. The Trojan War would mark the end of the Age of Heroes, a final grand conflict in which gods and mortals fought together, but which left the mortal realm exhausted. After Troy, the gods would become more distant, and humanity would have to make its own way. The threat of a new overthrow always lurked in the background. Zeus had swallowed Metis to prevent her from bearing a son who would overthrow him. He had taken other precautions as well, ensuring that potential threats were neutralized before they could grow dangerous. But the curse of Uranus had not been fully broken. The cycle of overthrow had been interrupted, but not ended. Zeus would rule for as long as Greek civilization existed, but the possibility of his eventual fall remained, a reminder that even divine power is not eternal. The influence of the Titanomachy extends far beyond ancient Greece, resonating through millennia of Western culture and thought. The themes it explores, generational conflict, the establishment of order from chaos, the cost of power, the nature of justice, remain relevant to every age. The war between Titans and Olympians continues to speak to us because it addresses fundamental questions about authority, change, and the proper ordering of society. In literature, the Titanomachy has inspired countless works. John Milton's Paradise Lost draws on the imagery of the war, with the fallen angels' rebellion against God paralleling the Titans' war against the Olympians. The cosmic scale of the conflict, the heavens themselves becoming a battlefield, the defeated cast into a pit of suffering, all of these elements appear in Milton's epic, filtered through Christian theology, but still recognizable as inheritors of the Greek tradition. The Romantic poets of the 18th and 19th centuries were particularly drawn to the figure of Prometheus, seeing in him a symbol of rebellion against tyranny. Percy Bysshe, Shelley's Prometheus Unbound, reimagines the Titan as a revolutionary hero who defies Zeus's unjust rule. Lord Byron invoked Promethean imagery in his own work, celebrating the Titan's defiance and suffering. The Romantics saw the Titanomachy not as a simple tale of good triumphing over evil, but as a more complex narrative about power, justice, and the costs of both submission and rebellion. In the 20th century, modernist and postmodernist writers continued to find meaning in the myth. James Joyce referenced it in Ulysses, using allusions to Zeus and the Olympians to comment on authority and power in modern Dublin. Science fiction writers have reimagined the Titanomachy in futuristic settings, with the war between old and new gods becoming a war between different species, different ideologies, or different visions of humanity's future. The myth has also been tremendously influential in popular culture. Comic books, particularly those dealing with superhero mythology, often draw on Titanomachy themes. The idea of immensely powerful beings fighting wars that reshape reality, of younger heroes overthrowing older tyrants, of cosmic conflicts that dwarf human concerns. All of these are staples of superhero comics and can trace their lineage back to the Titanomachy. Movies and television series have adapted the myth directly or borrowed its themes. Films like Clash of the Titans and Wrath of the Titans, though they take considerable liberties with the source material, introduce the Greek gods and their conflicts to new audiences. The Percy Jackson book series and films reimagine the Olympians for a young adult audience, with the Titans attempting to rise again and overthrow Zeus's rule, continuing the cycle of conflict into the modern era. Video games have perhaps been the most recent medium to embrace the Titanomachy. Games like God of War allow players to participate in divine conflicts, to fight against and alongside the Olympians, to experience something of the scale and power of these cosmic wars. These interactive retellings let audiences engage with the myth in new ways, making choices and experiencing consequences, bringing a new dimension to these ancient stories. The myth has also influenced how we think about revolution and social change. The image of the Titans, representing an old order that has become rigid and tyrannical, being overthrown by younger, more dynamic forces, has been invoked by revolutionaries throughout history. The American Revolution, the French Revolution, various 20th century revolutions, all have been described by their proponents using language that echoes the Titanomachy, presenting the old regime as titans that must be cast down. But the myth also offers a cautionary message about revolution. The Olympians, having overthrown the Titans, established their own hierarchy, their own system of power. Zeus, though initially a rebel, became a king who could be just as harsh as his father when his authority was challenged. This suggests that revolution, while sometimes necessary, does not automatically lead to a better world. The new boss may be much like the old boss, and the cycle of rebellion and establishment continues. In educational contexts, the Titanomachy serves as an introduction to Greek mythology for many students. It provides a narrative framework for understanding the Greek gods, explaining how they came to power and what that power meant. The war's complexity, with its multiple characters, shifting alliances, and grand themes, makes it an excellent teaching tool for exploring how mythological narratives work and what purposes they serve in a culture. Scholars continue to study the Titanomachy, analyzing its variants, its evolution over time, and its cultural significance. Archaeological discoveries sometimes shed new light on how the myth was understood in different regions and periods. Comparative mythology examines how the Greek war between generations of gods relates to similar myths in other cultures. The Norse Aesir-Vanir War, the Mesopotamian conflict between Tiamat and Marduk, the Hittite succession of divine kings. These comparisons reveal common human concerns about power, succession, and cosmic order. The myth has also entered our everyday language in subtle ways. When we describe something as titanic, we're invoking these ancient beings of immense power. When we speak of Olympian detachment or achievement, we're referencing the gods who won the Great War. Atlas has become synonymous with bearing heavy burdens, so much so that books of maps are called atlases in reference to the Titan condemned to hold up the sky. These linguistic inheritances show how deeply the myth has penetrated our collective consciousness. In philosophy and theology, the Titanomachy continues to provoke thought. Questions about divine justice, the nature of authority, the relationship between power and right, the possibility of progress, all of these can be explored through the lens of the myth. Does might make right, or do victors simply write the history? Were the Olympians truly more just than the Titans, or simply more successful? These questions have no simple answers, which is part of what makes the myth enduringly valuable. Environmental movements have sometimes invoked Titanomachy imagery, casting humanity's current industrial civilization as the Titans, powerful, established, but ultimately destructive, and presenting a more sustainable future as the Olympians, the new order that must overthrow the old to prevent catastrophe. This application of the myth shows its flexibility, its ability to be adapted to contemporary concerns while retaining its essential character. In psychology and personal development, the myth serves as a metaphor for individual transformation. The overthrow of the Titans can represent the process of maturation, where old patterns of behavior, the Titans, must be confronted and overcome by new, more adaptive approaches, the Olympians. The 10-year duration of the war reminds us that meaningful change is not quick or easy, that transformation requires sustained effort and sacrifice. The Titanomachy also reminds us of the importance of allies and cooperation. Zeus could not have won the war alone, no matter how powerful his thunderbolt. He needed his siblings, the Cyclopes, the Hecatoncheires, and various Titans who chose to side with him. This emphasis on coalition building, on recognizing that even the mightiest need help, is a lesson that remains relevant in our interconnected modern world. The myth's treatment of the defeated also offers lessons. The Titans were not destroyed but imprisoned, their power contained but not eliminated. This might be read as a message about dealing with opposition. Not every conflict needs to end in annihilation. Sometimes containment, transformation, or integration is more appropriate than destruction. The fact that some Titans were welcomed into the new order suggests that even former enemies can become valued members of society if given the chance. The Titanomachy stands as one of the foundational myths of Western civilization, a story whose echoes continue to reverberate through our culture, our literature, our art, and our understanding of the world. It is a tale of cosmic scope and intimate drama, of battles that shook the heavens and personal conflicts between fathers and sons, mothers and daughters, siblings and rivals. It shows us gods who are powerful yet flawed, who can create wonders yet also cause suffering, who rule the cosmos yet are themselves bound by fate and prophecy. The war between Titans and Olympians was more than just a succession crisis among divine beings. It represented a fundamental transformation in the nature of the cosmos, a shift from one kind of order to another. The Titans embodied the primal forces of nature, ancient and powerful, but ultimately static. The Olympians brought change, dynamism, the possibility of progress, but also the certainty of conflict. The victory of Zeus and his siblings meant that the universe would be a place of motion and transformation rather than eternal stasis. The 10 years of warfare left scars on the cosmos that never fully healed. Geography was reshaped. Divine relationships were forever altered. The line between gods and mortals became more complex, with heroes and demigods walking the earth as living proof of divine interest in human affairs. The establishment of Olympus as the center of divine authority created a new focal point for cosmic governance, a place where justice could theoretically be sought and conflicts resolved. Yet the myth does not present this new order as perfect or beyond criticism. Zeus, for all his wisdom and power, was capable of cruelty, infidelity, and excessive pride. The Olympians, having fought for justice against Cronus's tyranny, sometimes acted tyrannically themselves. The imprisonment of the Titans in Tartarus, Atlas's eternal punishment, Prometheus's later sufferings, all of these remind us that victory does not automatically confer virtue. That power must be constantly checked by wisdom and compassion if it is not to become mere domination. The cycle of overthrow that runs through the myth, Uranus overthrown by Cronus, Cronus by Zeus, raises profound questions about whether such cycles can ever truly be broken. Zeus took precautions that his father had not, swallowing Metis to prevent her from bearing a son who would overthrow him. But even this action echoes his father's attempts to prevent destiny. The myth seems to suggest that every generation believes it can break free from the patterns of the past, yet often ends up repeating them in new forms. For the ancient Greeks, the Titanomachy explained the world they lived in. It explained why Zeus ruled from Olympus, why Poseidon commanded the seas, why Hades governed the dead. It provided a narrative for understanding natural phenomena. Thunderstorms were Zeus's power manifesting. Earthquakes were Poseidon's wrath. The changing seasons reflected Persephone's movement between worlds. More than that, it offered a framework for understanding power, succession, justice, and cosmic order. For us today, millennia removed from ancient Greece, the Titanomachy still speaks with surprising clarity. We live in an age of rapid change, where old orders constantly give way to new ones, where established authorities face challenges from emergent forces, where the question of how to govern justly remains as pressing as ever. The war between Titans and Olympians, stripped of its supernatural trappings, is fundamentally about these eternal human concerns. The myth reminds us that change, while often necessary and even beneficial, comes at a cost. 10 years of war devastated the cosmos. Countless divine beings suffered. The landscape was permanently scarred. Even in victory, the Olympians lost much. This is a truth that every revolution, every major social transformation, every overthrow of an old order must reckon with. Progress is possible, but it is never cheap, and those who pursue it must be prepared to pay the price. At the same time, the myth warns against the dangers of trying to prevent change. Uranus's attempt to imprison his children led directly to his overthrow. Cronus's attempt to consume his children only delayed and intensified his eventual fall. The lesson seems to be that change is inevitable, that attempting to prevent it through force or control only makes the eventual transformation more violent. Better to guide change, to work with it, than to try futilely to stop it. The Titanomachy ultimately tells us that the universe is shaped by conflict, but need not be defined by it. After the war came peace, creativity, the flourishing of culture and civilization. The energy that went into fighting was channeled into building, into creating the world that mortals would inherit. The gods who had been warriors became patrons of arts and crafts, agriculture and navigation, justice and wisdom. Destruction gave way to creation. As we conclude this exploration of the Titanomachy, we're left with a story that is at once ancient and contemporary, mythological and deeply human. The thunder that Zeus first hurled in that cosmic war still echoes in our stories, our language, our understanding of power and justice. The image of Atlas holding up the sky reminds us that some burdens must be borne, that strength is measured not just by what we can lift, but by what we can endure. The transformation of the cosmos from Titan rule to Olympian governance shows us that change, while difficult and costly, is possible. The war between Titans and Olympians ended, but its consequences shaped an entire universe. From that conflict came the world of Greek mythology, with all its richness and complexity, its heroes and monsters, its tragedies and triumphs. From that mythology came much of Western culture, the stories we tell, the art we create, the questions we ask about justice, power, and the proper ordering of society. So the next time you hear thunder roll across the sky, think of Zeus and his master bolt, earned through years of war and sacrifice. When you feel the earth shake, remember Poseidon and his trident, symbol of his realm and his power. When you contemplate the inevitability of death, recall Hades and his dark kingdom, the destination we all must eventually reach. These are the gods who won the Titanomachy, who overthrew the old order and established the new, whose stories continue to shape how we understand ourselves and our world. The Titanomachy reminds us that every age must define itself against what came before, must decide what to preserve and what to transform, must balance the wisdom of tradition with the energy of innovation. It shows us that power alone is not enough. It must be combined with justice, wisdom, and the courage to do what is necessary even when the cost is high. And perhaps most importantly, it demonstrates that even the mightiest beings are shaped by their choices, that character matters, and that how we wield power defines us more than the mere possession of it. The Great War is over. The Titans lie imprisoned in Tartarus, guarded by the hundred-handed ones. Atlas holds up the sky at the edge of the world. Zeus sits on his throne atop Olympus, master bolt at his side, eagle perched nearby. The cosmos has found a new order, one that will endure for as long as these stories are told and remembered. And we, inheritors of these ancient tales, continue to find in them reflections of our own struggles, our own hopes, our own understanding of what it means to build a just and ordered world from the chaos that came before. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of mythology's greatest conflicts, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel. We explore these ancient stories not just because they're entertaining, though they certainly are, but because they continue to offer wisdom and insight relevant to our modern world. The thunder of the Titanomachy may have sounded millennia ago, but its echoes still resound, and by listening to them, we learn something about ourselves, our societies, and the eternal human struggle to create order, justice, and meaning in an often chaotic world. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the war that shaped the cosmos.